give me a brief rundown of your resume so that I can, whether or not I use you telling me or just kind of run it down.
Well, I think I'm somewhat typical of many stories in that I started very young, 15 years old, a little radio station in Greenville, Ohio.
Yeah.
And I always jokingly say they made me news director because they needed somebody to open up the mail that came to news director because they didn't have one. So they said, so anyhow. But that wasn't what good. I went to college to be a psychologist, become an educational psychologist. However, I at 16 I would do weekends in the big city, Dayton, Ohio, at Wing, and on Christmas breaks so, suddenly, but like I say, I still, I said, well, this is just a hobby. And I worked there was a commercial station in Oxford, Ohio, which for some people is sort of legendary FM. It was OXR then. It became another alternative format with this similar call letter. But anyhow, then one day I get a call back from the radio station in Dayton, Ohio. Said, we want you to do full-time morning drive. And I wasn't as, I said, well,
How
what the
old were
hell?
you at this point?
I was at that time 20. I
Uh,
was a junior in college.
okay.
And so I say, you know what? Now, anyhow, we can go. The whole silly thing is why I didn't major in broadcasting. But anyhow, so
So you turned down your first job offer, which was a morning gig?
no, I was doing news, but no, I
Oh,
took it.
right.
So
Okay.
my father, who coincidentally was the assistant sales manager at that radio station. And they didn't tell him that they were going to ask me to do this. So I call and say, hey, I've made a decision. I'm going to put off finishing the next couple. Actually, I think I only had I think I had about a year to go, maybe a little less. And we're going to be working together. Well, he didn't talk to me for 2 years. Well, I mean, we talked to for a while. My mother, who just recently died at 102,
Yeah.
was a psychologist herself. And she said, what's interesting, she said, yeah, no, that's great. Do it for 1 or 2 years, get out of your system, and then go back to grad school. So then even literally up to probably into her late 90s, I don't know if still in the hundreds, she used to always look at me and said, I guess you haven't got that out of your system yet, have you?
So she's
So,
talking not only as your mom, but as a psychologist. So her
yeah,
advice made a lot of sense.
well, it did. And there's a lot we could talk about on that later. But as far as a complete resume, then like a lot of us, from Wing, I went to Wife in Indianapolis. And then, no, actually WSAI down the road in Cincinnati. And was hired by Joe Gillespie, who you may know the name. Joe is at Wins, and he's a longtime friend now. So it's friendships we make in the business, sort of like you and I, even though we never actually worked together. And so from there to Wife in Indianapolis, and then actually most of my time then became out on the West Coast. In 1978, Joe Gillespie had gone out to KSDO at the time, which was a news talk radio station owned by Combined Communications, which became Gannett. And John Bayless was running the radio group. He had been our general manager in Cincinnati. So they said, hey, why don't you come out and we'll put the band back together. So I went out to San Diego. And then about 7 years in San Diego, then up to King in Seattle. And King in Seattle was actually the first time I was also the program director and operations manager. From there, WCAU in Philadelphia, which was an interesting experience if we want to get into that. I had hired the former mayor, Frank Rizzo, and we have some interesting stories about that.
Yeah.
And actually working with Ed McLaughlin, who has just started to syndicate this guy that you might have known out of Sacramento called Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah. Right.
And a story I like to tell about that. I don't know if you want to, we can mention it now or later, or if you're going to edit this. But at the time, this is
Well,
1980.
why don't we go ahead and mention it? I'll
Okay.
worry about editing when it becomes necessary. I'm interested, so go ahead.
Okay. It's 1989 then. And somewhere along the line, I think only because Ed, when he was president of ABC, Ed McLaughlin, um, I had a lot of ABC product in San Diego and elsewhere. Actually, in Seattle, I cleared some shows that he needed cleared and stuff like that there. So I would say we became friends, like you do in this business. And he kept trying to say, Greg, I said I love Rush. As a matter of fact, when I was in Seattle, I wanted him to come up to Seattle when he was in Sacramento,
Yeah.
and because Norm Woodruff, the late Norm Woodruff, who also was instrumental in Rush's career.
Yeah.
He said, "Hey, Greg, you got to check this guy out." I said, "This guy's great," but of course, King was a fairly, I hate using labels, but at the time, liberal station, and they're going, "Well, I don't know if this is going to work," and this and that.
Yeah.
So anyhow, make a long story short, Ed and Bruce Mars, start syndicating Rush and take him to New York. And Ed says, "I know you like Rush, just clear it." Well, I'm working for, CBS, WCAU, and he used to say, "Well, just put him on." And I'll never forget, I used to like to joke with Ed. I said, "Ed, now let's see, when you were president of ABC Radio, and one of your program directors, just out of the clear blue sky, put a show on and never got clearance from his general manager or the president of the radio division." He said, "Oh, okay." So anyhow, I'm making this way too long.
All right.
However, the ending's worth it. I end up convincing New York to allow me to put him on weekends. And Ed says, "Okay, that's good." However, ready for this? This is 1989, 1990. I had to hire a special producer to edit out anything that was too controversial.
Of course. Of
So
course.
anyhow, and I kept saying, I kept talking about Limbaugh, and we never got him cleared full time, because then in the infinite wisdom along that same time, one time I was called to New York, and they said, "Greg, you know what? We just, talk radio's dead." I said, "What?" They said, "And we're gonna change the station and simulcast the oldies OGL." And I'm going, "Look," I actually said to them, I said, "Look, I don't, if you don't like me, fire me, but keep them. I mean." And no, they did that. Now, my only satisfaction out of that, because I kept pushing to put Rush on full time. And regardless of what you think of politics, and especially at the time,
Oh, of course.
a phenomenal broadcaster that
Yeah.
changed the course of,
Yeah.
like Howard Stern. I have a Stern story, but I do it. Okay. But anyhow, the positive side of this is that after that experience, few years or short time later, when Rush was finally taking off, I'm working at the time for now I'm out in Los Angeles with KFWB and Westinghouse, the old Westinghouse before Westinghouse bought CBS. Right. And Nancy Whitman, who was the one that had said talk radio's dead, and pushed back on putting Limbaugh on full time, actually said to me, she said, "Greg, I guess you were right about that Limbaugh thing."
You know what I find myself explaining to people a lot, and I have for many years. First of all, just before you started with your story of Rush Limbaugh in 1989, when he arrived in New York and went national, I was working with him in Sacramento.
Well, I know. And
Tyler,
and
I was doing the morning show, and he was on at 9 a.m. And he would come in every morning, and we'd do one of those.
As a fan of both of yours.
Pardon me?
As a fan of both of you.
Yeah. Anyway, Bruce Mars, who you mentioned,
good guy,
was consulting the station at the time, and he had the great idea that maybe I should be program director. No, I take that back. Our general manager had that idea.
Rich Etchison.
Yeah. And Bruce is the one that said to me, you might not want to take that on. I mean, think about it. It's a lot of additional work, and it'll put you in a different position. So I did it for a year, but he was absolutely right. It's like I was doing mornings and having a great time, because part of performing is ignoring everything else you've been told by management.
Exactly.
Knowing when to break the rules and all that. So anyway, during that year, though, this is my claim to fame with Rush. We became very close, actually. We spent a lot of time just socializing and so forth. He's a delightful guy. And as you said, regardless of what you thought of his politics or his performance, most people have no idea, and there's no way to explain, and it doesn't really matter. But he was really a great person.
Yeah.
I took him to lunch one time, and I said, here's the thing that we got to keep in mind about Rush. We've gone down this tangent, but I like it. He said that in 1988, nobody in history had ever taken a local talk show and turned it into a national one. Nobody was talking about national issues. Nobody was talking about Russia and the president and the White House and the Congress and all that stuff. And I mean, we were all locally, we were all talking about local things, right? And I took him to lunch one day, and I said, Rush, it's your show. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I need you to love what you're doing and be enthused. But I will warn you this. I said, if you don't find something to talk about besides Russia and Congress, your career is going to go right down the toilet. He just thanked me very much for not telling him what to do. And then he made his merry way.
Yeah.
He came to my wedding, and the next day he was off to New York.
Oh, I know. And again, a couple of things around that same time, because it really relates in that why, because we thought you can't talk national politics locally. Well, first of all, he made it entertaining. The key was, it wasn't necessarily at the time. It became, when he became, more and more the, the standard bearer.
I'm glad you're saying that. That's an very important thing, is that Rush did it because it was Rush, and it was Rush being an entertainer, and Rush being a personality more than it was about his positions.
I've never really gotten an argument on this. Maybe I would these days, but I used to say, look, if from the at least the first 10 years of Rush, had he been a Democrat, or had he would have been every bit as successful, because he was one of he was a breath of fresh air in what talk radio had become.
Yeah.
At the same time, this is where I think talk radio really got to take off. I remember once when I was in Philadelphia, is when Stern was his first syndicated station was YSB in Philly. Now I'm at CAU, and I'm listening. I'm going, yeah, they're playing some music, but I go, that's a talk show. So, we have one of those group meetings with PDs and GMs and this and that. And I said, I'm not saying I know what to do about this, but I got to tell you, that's a talk show. And we're going to have to be, that's going to be our competition for our spoken word format. Yeah. They all looked at me and said, you're crazy. That's a rock. I said, trust. I mean, I just said, okay, but I'm telling you, I think, because again, here's a guy that made listening to the radio entertaining, and the music in the end was just getting in the way of the magnitude of his personality. So anyhow, so that's where I go back. I mean, back with Rush, the two of them, the timing of that, particularly for me in Philadelphia, really gave me a whole new perspective on how to approach talent. And as you say, and Chuck Lorre, all these guys that many people may not know in our younger generations, but being creative, thinking outside the box, but really being awesome is realize. Don't even think there is a box. I mean, just let the imagination go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned Chuck Lorre, and you mentioned the creativity of radio, and that certainly takes us to the crux of the matter here. Right. Is radio dead? What killed it? Was it technology, or was it just a loss? Just getting getting lost in the way with the corporations and everything else. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of you.
No, but I'm glad we started this way because it was about 20 years ago when I got to KGO, and probably 2000, 1999, 2000, the dot-com boom was going.
Yeah.
And I was losing some of the younger employees in the newsroom. I was the news director, and the great Jack Swanson, who you're going to talk to,
Right.
and Mickey Lekoff. I'm very, fortunate to have that experience. But anyway, we were losing younger people, or I was, out of the newsroom to the Silicon Valley, to the new startups and all. And even I was tempted a little bit. Bob Kay, I don't know if you know Bob, and the late Al Brady Law, they had started this Command Audio, which was going to be audio on demand. So again, my mind's going, But then as I was these kids that were going down, they said, well, what are you going to do? And basically what they were going to do is what they were doing in my newsroom, creating content. And that's when it hit me. I said, you know what? And I heard other people say this much wiser than I am, I think probably early in my career. They said, Greg, you're really not in radio. On your side of the hall, at that end, the way the building was set up there, we were like a laboratory. You're in the content innovation part. And that unfortunately, I mean, to me, we're not in radio. I would tell people, and then in the last 20 years, because they'd say, oh my God, radio's dead, what am I going to do? I said, what are you going to do? You're a very talented, smart person. You're going to use those same talents. Radio's just a delivery platform.
Right.
That's all it is. And to some extent, the creative side of our business should somewhat embrace that, because that gives us so many more avenues for our creativity. The downside is all of that gets watered down as far as monetization, because you're not going to get, at least initially, not going to get paid as much or whatever, because all of a sudden there's competition. I mean, think about, when you think about it, we had somewhat of you think about your years in whether Sacramento or San Francisco, and you had 4 or 5 radio stations that were competing, really. I mean, even though you had more in the market, and you had, like, Los Angeles was $1 billion advertising market. How did you not make money? I mean, we used to say in Los Angeles, a police radio could make bucks, but suddenly you get more and more competition. And also, so anyhow, the first part of my answer to that, which is way too verbose, is I still say radio in my mind was my life in radio was in content. And that to me, if we fully embrace it, that's still alive. Radio as a delivery, as a financially successful operation is dying, if not dead, for a couple of reasons. One of which, all of a sudden, there's a whole lot of new competition. I mean, it's suddenly like, that advertising pie is. But I do think the biggest
podcasts and all the online stuff, the interactive,
and all the online. But I do think, quite frankly, and I think you still work. We both for a while worked for the same company, one of the big conglomerates these days, and I think sadly, once with the deregulation, once we became real estate. I remember at the time somebody said, we're becoming real estate. And so you look at the debt service on these, I mean, both the 2 major, well, even our old CVS, you look at the debt service on, so they no longer cared about product. I mean, they basically ceded the landscape to all these new, rather than taking the Mickey Lekoff, Jack Swanson, give them a reason not to want to leave. Stick with, wait a minute, that's still the most entertaining audio entertainment I can get in San Francisco. It's on the radio. Nobody can match it on a podcast, or nobody, but rather to satisfy paying all that debt and make the quarterly call look good, slash, and of course they want quality. I mean, there's 100 examples in the retail, in the general business world.
My biggest frustration, when I was talking with Andy Ludlam yesterday, I was talking about this, is that at some point during my career, and I kind of focus on Dallas only because I arrived here almost 12 years ago, brand new to the market, and going, okay, well, I've got a second lease on my career here. And I was just excited about it. So I wanted to talk to people about it. I wanted to talk to my new colleagues about the craft of radio, the way we used to when I got into it, the late 60s, early 70s. My goodness, they had to chase us out of the radio station.
Oh,
And we would go off to each other's apartments with a six-pack of beer and sit and listen to air
air
checks
checks
of the greats
and
of,
DXing from stations,
yeah.
hundreds of,
And we would talk about all of that craft stuff. Did you hear how he said that? How are we going to do this? All of that. And you cannot, Greg, to this day, you cannot muster a conversation along those lines among anybody at any radio station I've been in the last 30 years, regardless of their age and regardless of the fact that, well, it's new to them and they're just kind of excited about radio, but they want to talk about it. Um,
yeah.
I think part of that is the age difference, but it just it breaks my heart that nobody's even thinking. It seems like nobody's even thinking about how to do what they do and why they do it and all of that stuff that we were taught, or at least we had demonstrated for us when we were coming out.
Well, I think part of consolidation also screwed that up, in that everything became cookie cutter,
Yeah.
and innovation was not encouraged. I mean, it was no, we're going to take this format here, and I mean, I can't really speak much for the radio guys per se, but I've heard the same complaint, that for the most part it was, no, this, it would. I can't tell you the times I wouldn't say get my hand slapped, but they said, no, we're not going to do that. Why? First of all, it might cost a couple of extra bucks.
Yeah.
I mean, and then all promotion budgets went away. I mean, which is always, one my years at working for Westinghouse, and I think other companies said the same thing. They believed in giving you a promotional budget for your radio station because, first of all, they said, we're selling the benefits of advertising. If we're
Right.
not advertising,
Right.
we're being a little bit hypocritical here, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right.
So it all just, and I think really a large part of it comes back to it, which at the time, I think somewhere I was quoted somewhere when asked about the deregulation back in the 90s or whatever. I said, I always like to be, at least initially, I wouldn't say, ridiculously optimistic, but if this frees up regulation on some of the things we do, I'm gonna wait and see before I make a judgment on it.
Yeah.
But clearly, I gave up on that hopefulness when, when you're working for. When we did almost a 50% profit margin and we're told it was not enough. So, I mean, that's what I realized.
That's right. That's right. Because upstairs, they're always saying, okay, good job. Now let's go another 6% this next year.
Well, exactly. I mean, we became real, and and I don't know where I feel on this, but then over the years too, because right now I want to say real quick, I want to put in a push, and you should talk to KJ Allen and Benji Kurtz, who own this little radio group out here in Lake Country, Georgia, called the Oconee Radio Group. I do a little stuff with them, and they serve the community. He has no debt. He runs this. He's amazing. He and Benji, I think, had both experience with Cox, and then he was down in Nashville. But it gets back to what I was going to say. And a lot of the local owners or the regional owners, I guess you sit there and you say, suddenly the station that you pay $200,000 for is now somebody's offering $50 million.
Yeah.
How do you not take it? But on the other hand, you wish you'd say, well, I'll sell it to somebody who actually wants to run a radio station and not just try to flip a house.
Right.
I mean,
it's the bottom line. problem with corporate radio that came from deregulation is just that you have a bunch of thousands of investors who don't know or care anything about the business. It's just a part of their portfolio that somebody recommended they buy, and now they demand a return. And you can't, I mean, that's all of us, right? You can't blame the way we're dealing with our investments. But when radio got out of the business of identifying with their local communities and catering to them in all kinds of ways, not just straightforward entertainment. I've forgotten who it was, but I was working for RKO at the time, who said, you know what, every radio station is like a hamburger joint. We all sell the same product. We sell hamburgers and cheeseburgers and French fries and Cokes and stuff, but it's in the packaging. It's in the way you present it.
Exactly.
And all of that went away because investors don't understand, nor do they care.
Right. Right. I mean, that's it. And when you think about it, any other business, as I say, the years, we were, I mean, being close to the general manager and the sales manager in LA, when suddenly, like I say, a near 50% EBITDA was not good enough. I would tell that to somebody in the banking, some other business. They'd go, "What? That's incredible."
Right.
But, so that's suddenly when I also thinking to myself, still to this day, as a pretty good capitalist. But to me, it really defined, as cliche as it may sound, there's a huge difference to a good profit and flat out greed.
Yeah.
Unrealistic
and expectations
at the expense of a business that serves a community and
makes people happy.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's the frustration.
Inform and entertain.
Yeah, I mean, that's it has. What I think, like you, I mean, I think now in major events we covered among those of my lifetime, but let's think LA during the riots in the LA, the earthquake. I mean, my God, KFWB and KNX, but we did better. But I mean, we and I'll remember, I mean, I think it was either during the riots or during the earthquake, my boss said to me, he said, "I don't care when we run a spot, I mean, just we gotta keep Los Angeles and the Southern California informed." Now he did say the minute KNX starts running spots, we start running, but that doesn't happen today because first of all, they don't even spend the money for even 2 or 3 news people, real news people.
Right.
I mean, that's not demeaning who's doing, but I'm saying.
No, what you have is a lot of people who are starting out in the business that would have started out 30 or 40 years ago. They would have started out in a small market and learned their way up. But you have a lot of them starting out right at the top.
Yeah.
It's not their fault.
Well, it's not their fault, but it's, so, I mean, all of that really spinning back to is radio dead or dying and why? And I think all of that is and I think it probably can all boil down to perhaps, I would say 2 things. Suddenly, common sense tells you when there was a time, okay, LA has 60 radio stations, but let's admit 20 were probably reasonably profitable for $1 billion, what became at one point, I don't know if it still is, $1 billion. It was a bigger radio, I mean, advertising market than New York City. And but then you suddenly have all these other options that agencies and quite frankly, we got away with almost forcing them to buy what rates we set for the radio station, because where else are you going to buy your ads? I mean, you have no other outlet. So I think that's part of it, just the progression of time versus. But the other part is I think deregulation from the standpoint of, I mean, we know a couple of major companies that still have $1 billion debts and due within a year or two that they, some have been delisted. I mean, it's just complete negligence on even running a business. I mean, how many of us You know, I mean, as a general manager of McDonald's, we'd be fired by now.
Yeah, exactly. It occurs to me that I kind of cut you off mid resume. I don't know how far you want to go, but I do know that you wound up producing a show in Washington, D.C.
I
with the
did.
former education secretary.
Well, with a former senator.
Pardon me?
Former Senator Fred Thompson. And,
right. That's
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And
He was a good friend of Bill Bennett. But
and before that, you were news director of, at least in my experience, and I think everybody else's, one of the greatest news talk radio stations that ever existed at KGO in San Francisco.
no question. I mean, and I take, I mean, the credit to that goes back to actually, I mean, Mickey and Jack, but it really goes back to actually Ed McLaughlin to an extent, who was general manager there, and Jim Dunbar was the first program director.
Brilliant
Dunbar,
on-air talent at that.
Which again, showing what wouldn't happen today. KGO would not exist. We know that would not exist today. Dunbar always told the great story, which he swears was true. He was at WLS as a music jock.
Yeah.
And they bring him out to San Francisco to do this news talk station, because I think KBC probably went before them. I don't. Jack will know better than I do. And he tells the story. He said the first year, he said, first of all, I thought this was crazy, but I wanted to be a PD and this is that. So he said the first year as a talk station, it really didn't do well, and they were ready to pull the plug. He said, so I don't know whether he went back to New York or they came out to San Francisco. And he said, he was telling the whole group, but I mean, I was there, and he told me, he said, for an hour and a half, I'm passionately saying, no, this is the format of the future. This is, you'll regret if you pull the plug on this. Da, 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 da. And when it's over, he says, I never believed that for a second, but I needed a job. I just moved the family out.
When was that? Going back to in his time when he started out there?
I think that would have been probably, I should know that off the top of my head, but KGO probably went spoken word. It had to be mid-60s.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Mid-60s. I mean, I could.
Yeah, it must be, because that's when I started listening to him, and I was still in high school. I was in high school listening to the rock stations, the local stations, Croy, KXOA, KZAP in Sacramento. But I also listened to spoken word. I was like 16, 17 years old. But I picked up on Dunbar, Jim Dunbar, and Ted Wygant.
And Ted, God, I love Ted. I mean, they together again. Yes, it was news, and it was, I always hesitate to use the word entertainment, because people have, when I say entertainment, all it makes is like a well-written book or play. It pulls you in.
Or that it's necessarily a lot of laughs.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not a whoopee cushion and a clown's nose.
Yeah.
It makes you want to pay attention.
No, what it does is it makes you love these people. They're part of your life.
Your family.
They're a very important part of your life. So Dunbar and Wygant, as I grew up and I got into radio, and then I wound up accidentally into news and talk. I never wanted to go into news or talk. I was a disc jockey, but that's what happened. So as I started to learn how to do those things, I thought, you know what? If I work at this really, really hard, and I remember telling you and Jack many years ago, I said, I realized a long time ago, I want to get to a point that when Dunbar gives up, I want to be his replacement. I never got there, but I learned so much from just listening to them and learning how to relate the information, the content, which was, the news, the current events of the day, and to make it palatable, and leave people with a smile on their face and a little bit of information in their head.
Just be a human being. Be yourself. Just be a human being. You don't have, again, you don't have to, I mean, you don't really have to do shtick. I mean, it's like I used to say on the news side of business sometimes, as far as writing, because I used to, actually, there was a time in my life, actually, it was back in Dayton, Ohio. I was G. Paul Tantum 2020 News doing sensational, and but I used to say after that and talking, if you know how to write well for radio or just period,
Yeah.
you really don't have to you really don't have to sensationalize anything,
No.
because many of these stories are sensational in and of themselves if you know how to be a good storyteller. And Dunbar as part of a news-oriented information program and TED, that's exactly what they were.
And to pointedly stay out of the way. That's not necessarily the same thing as being unbiased. It means you can express an opinion. You can do it with a chuckle. You can do it with a sound that implies a little bit of irony or a question, or even just with words. But it doesn't mean that you have to get in the way of the facts, because of the facts are the part of life that we're all involved with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. I mean, and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of KGO, just yesterday on my Facebook feed, the morning memories of everything, it popped up that now I've forgotten how many years ago it was, 2 or 3 years ago, that KGO went dark and turned into, I guess, what it is now, which is a sports betting format. And I've thought about that so many times, and I know so many people that have we just absolutely felt, still to this point, devastated by the loss of that radio station.
Oh,
I don't know what the equivalent is on the East Coast. I don't know. I don't know, because I don't know the East Coast, but I would guess 10-10 wins or something like that, except that KGO was so much more because it was talk, and you had great talk personalities and the news blocks and all that stuff. But it occurred to me,
community involvement. I mean, again,
yeah,
Mickey and I mean that it was, and it was sincere. It
right,
was because and it was also a recognition that the community will give back, and that included the advertising community, and
right,
it did.
right.
I mean, again, aside from #1 ratings, we all, most of the time we're #1 billers. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
I guess the closest comparison I could come up with would be WGN in Chicago,
yeah,
which suffered much of the same fate.
and probably CCO. I was a little smaller market, but
Yeah, yeah. But with KGO, it occurred to me, being so close to it as I was, I've thought about you in the last couple of days, and Jack, and Mickey, and Chris Barry.
Chris Berry, great guy. He's
Yeah,
in San Diego. He's having a good time. So
yeah.
yeah.
And so many people that I've known that have worked there. And I thought about you all, and I thought about the time that it crashed and burned. And I thought, you know what? If I were in your position, I might be thankful, because it didn't just fail. It disappeared from the face of the earth and
Oh,
became something that shouldn't even exist.
oh, I know. Well, and it's interesting. I left in 2006 because this is one of those things. I would have been very happy if Mickey and Jack were to grace me with the privilege to stay there till my last day on the radio. Except in 2006, I'm 54, 55 years old. And I'm thinking, okay, first of all, I was always surprised when I got any job offers once I turned 40. So I'm going, okay. I mean,
Right.
I was realistic about what the business was. And so I get a call from probably somebody well, and other people, Jim Farley, and at the time helping consult the station back in Washington, D.C. was Walter Sabo.
Oh,
And
sure.
yeah, and they
He's
say,
on my list too, by the way. I'm going to be talking
yeah,
with him.
well, no, Walter's great. I mean, we got many stories there. But anyhow, they say, hey, we're building this Washington Post radio, and it was interesting. The first pitch, I think, was from Jim. Would you be interested in it? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, years ago in San Diego, um, we did the radio magazine at Kogo, the old Kogo. I said, I don't know. Plus, I'm very happy. I mean, I was very happy at KGO. And Sabo calls, and then I think Jim calls back again. And he says, why don't you just come back and talk to us? Because we really think you're probably the guy or one of the only people that can do this. And I said, okay, first of all, I'm 55, so I'm no dummy. I'm the only one that you've talked to that would even consider the damn thing. Like Groucho Marx, you want me? Do I want to be a member of a club that wants me
Right.
that bad? So I said, then he said, why don't you just fly back and just talk to us? I said, Jim, I don't really want to do that because one of the few things I have no intention of taking the job. I said, one of the things, regardless of what anybody thinks of my success as programming or the years I was on the air, one of the things I think I kept intact was my integrity. And I'm trying to be honest with you. I said, no, just fly back. I understand that. Well, Dave, I get off the plane. It's supposed to be super secret. I mean, there's funny angles on that. And among the first things they do is take me down to the Washington Post. And you walk in there, it looks just like at the time, still like it looked like in All the President's Men.
Yeah, of course. Right.
And they're walking me through there. They said, this will be one of your newsrooms. They go, and Ben Bradley still had an emeritus office there, and Bernstein. I'm going, son, this isn't fair. And then we go up to, because it was Bonneville at the time, which owns WTOP, and we get to the building there, and they said, your other newsroom, you'll have access to the newsroom at WTOP. I'm going, that's just not fair, so so that's how I got to DC. I mean, that's why I left KGO. I guess that's what I was trying to get to the point. I'll never forget, I said to myself as I got in the plane, I was pretty sure I was going to get the offer. And long about St. Louis, I said, you know what? If I don't take this job, I should walk into Mickey's office or Jack's office on Monday and resign, because that means I've lost a passion for the business. If you can't get excited about the opportunity to do that, so I did that. I'll bore you with one other little funny thing. My wife picks me up at the airport. We lived in Walnut Creek, so the Oakland airport. And she says, okay, so you turned them down, right? And it was a Sunday morning. I said, well, there's a 10 o'clock church service. So she said, oh, dag nabbit. She said, you promised me we'd never leave California. And I said, well, how long have we been married? And then it was probably 35 years. It's now been more than 45. He said, yeah, how long have we been married? She said, 30 some years. I said, well, then I lied. So anyhow, that's how
But I'm curious. I'm trying to.
Anyhow, real quick. And then the day I resigned, the day I actually put in my formal resignation, is a day there's a conference call saying that ABC, the radio division, is being sold to
Disney.
Our good friend, not Cumulus yet, but Fareed and whatever that company was at the time.
I can't even think of it.
Yeah.
And they were still in place when I wound up in Dallas.
Yeah.
Or in Los Angeles. Anyway, I just wanted to go back to something you said, because I was a little bit confused. You said you went out to Washington, and you were given the mind-blowing tour and stuff, but then you decided you should come back to San Francisco and resign because you had lost the passion. And I don't.
I said if I didn't accept the offer.
Oh, I see.
If I was given the offer and didn't take it.
Okay.
That's saying, oh, okay, Greg, because I mean, even though I knew there was some improbabilities there. I mean, I even challenged them several times, saying there's some things they wanted to do with it. I won't go into it. To me, it's one of those things. The experience itself. I'm working with Jim and Joel Oxley and in the group I love. There were just some things I knew ahead of time that were troublesome. But anyhow, I'm glad I did it, and still have some, good friends from the Post, and as well as, what is now Bonneville. It's not Bonneville anymore. It's how quickly we forget the companies.
So at this point, you've been retired, so to speak. How long?
I retired full time 17.
Okay.
So what is that? 6 years?
Yeah, about that. I've always been reluctant to even consider using the word when it's
Well,
time for me,
I really, yeah, I don't think it's retiring because I'm busy with
because
another
that
cemetery.
kind of implies to me that, okay, you're done working, you're done doing the things that you love to do and that you did for whatever reasons you did it, and now you're going to sit home in front of the TV and pet the dog and go out and do a little gardening. All of that's fine, but I'm getting close to that point, so I haven't quite made the decision. But um, I am wondering, as a retired broadcaster of so many years, what do you do to keep yourself mentally involved in the things that you love?
Well, with again, you know, and I am a man of faith, so sometimes you wonder if this was led to. But there's a small radio group here that I mentioned, the Oconee Radio Group, and the station's actually one of the stations is a little down the street, not far from where I live. And just so one day I just said, hey, you know, I have a little bit of experience. Is there anything I can do? So I'm doing some stuff with this little radio group. Actually, I don't know if you remember the show we did on KGO called God Talk with Bernie before
Oh, absolutely.
Bernie
Sure.
Steele. Sort of created our own little local version of God Talk on Sunday mornings, and then I do some Saturday, and I do other, you know, I do. So I stay busy with that. Um, but then I still I'm still officially on the advisory board of the journalism school at Cal Poly out in San Luis Obispo, although
Oh,
I've missed a couple of I had mentors. This past year I didn't have a mentor, but I used to have some mentees that I would, you know, uh, Zoom with and talk
yeah,
with,
yeah.
and so that keeps me busy. Um, and
And you watch
you know,
TV and
then
play with the dog and you do some gardening.
well, actually, you know, it's interesting. I know, but I get involved with the community. We have this. Well, you being a thespian yourself and a playwright, actually before this little accident I had, I still perform. I was talked into going ahead and bring. It's been years since I acted, but did a little play and there's down in downtown Greensboro, Georgia. There's a festival hall which does some really nice community projects. If we bring in some nice acts, I got to learn to say no because they said, "Hey, you'd be great on the board of directors." So I'm on the board of directors of the festival hall now, which I start, and uh, and so it's interesting. You just it again. I think what happens is you allow yourself to realize, yes, you know, we you were a great broadcaster on the air. Yeah, I was okay, but also but these skills can be used elsewhere and keep me every bit as satisfied. And with my belief that radio, my years, one of the most satisfying things of it was serving a community. Uh, Getting to play with a little radio group, I thank them all the time for letting me be in the sandbox once in a while. They were just named Small Market Radio.
Yeah.
The station I'm involved with, particularly Doc 103.9, was named Small Market Radio Station of the Year for Georgia. I mean, it's really something you really should talk to this KJ Allen in one of your podcasts
Well,
when you get done.
I want to get those names and contacts from you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But
it also makes me think about Tom, who's doing the same kind
yeah,
of, yeah, who's doing the same kind of thing up in northern New York, I guess, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and I think he's sort of, I mean, you know, we've known each other a while. It's that sense of
back to your roots.
community. Well, and well, that's another thing. I mean, and it's giving and helping the community. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really. I don't want to sound, you know, because everybody. I mean, trust me, I was a good partier. But I mean, on the other hand, I always believed in in doing what I could to help a community. Uh, and so that's how I'm staying busy. I mean, I'm staying. Um, and there was another real significant point there, but you know, I am over 70 now, so I just lost it.
Yeah, I hear that. All right, I'm going to let you go with one thing, and that was something that you talked about a long time ago in this conversation, and that was um, now I'm being 70, 72. What was it? You said something that was so significant to me, and I've forgotten now. I woke up in the middle of the night with a bad cold and I didn't sleep very well. So it's catching up with me now. Oh, yeah, I remember. So I'll be able to edit all of that out. You mentioned your optimism and even suggesting perhaps it was a little over the top or something like that. But the things that you're talking about and the things that we've been discussing in terms of relating to the community and entertaining people while you're informing them, that's part of human nature. And say what you want about social media and the interactive world in which we live now. And the fact that live and local apparently doesn't mean what you and I used to think it does when it comes to when it comes to a choice of either live and local or on demand. People are going to take on demand. Never mind the way all of the technology is changing. Human nature is still human nature. So isn't there still hope for informing, entertaining, and serving the community?
I think that is always an opportunity. And even some names you may know that are, that work for me or work with me, or I work with out in Los Angeles will call, can you help me with the podcast? And I try to get them to emphasize, don't be that one that sticks out from these other, what's missing in the podcast environment. I mean, that's the way KGO, there wasn't a talk station, or one that truly served the community. So find that niche. And people with the talent you have, which these other people have, again, you're in the content, imagination. Having been a Disney employee, you're an Imagineer, but I mean, take those skills, and you have now, at least a much larger number of delivery platforms that you can use. And one thing I think both of us, you mentioned earlier, I don't think either of us started in this business to get rich. I mean, we were happy.
Right.
I remember one time when I first went to work for a union shop, I never knew there was such a thing as union time. I almost got grieved because I wouldn't put in overtime. They said, well, Tantum, you were on that fire for 12 hours. I said, yeah, but the fire was still going. I mean, I wasn't, the fire's over.
That's right.
Well, no, you got to put down for overtime. I said, there's overtime? What? Gee, would have spruced this. And so if you still have that passion, there is an avenue for you. I mean, even if it's going down to Publix and getting over, that's the grocery chain here.
I don't know if people our age can find a way to encourage people who are 40 years younger, but I sure hope somebody along the way can say, come on, man, pick it up. There's more than you could do than what you're trying to do.